My name is Camila Reyes. I'm 22 years old, and for the past 11 months, I've been working as a live-in housekeeper in a mansion that doesn't feel like it belongs to the world outside. It sits alone at the edge of a cliff in Northern California, where the wind comes in sharp off the Pacific and the seagulls cry like ghosts. You wouldn't even notice the place from the road. High hedges, tall black gate, no number on the mailbox. Just a long, silent driveway that disappears into trees. People assume a house that big must be full of life. But it isn't. It's quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way abandoned places are. I came here because I needed money. I just dropped out of community college, and my mom, who cleaned houses for a living before her back gave out, couldn't keep up with the rent anymore. When someone told me about a private job, good pay, no talking, I took it before asking any questions. I didn't know I'd be the only one in the house. Well, me and him. His name is Mr. Griffin Hale. He used to run one of those tech companies people write books about. Artificial intelligence, robotics, stuff I don't pretend to understand. He made billions before I ever learned how to balance a checkbook. Then he vanished. No press, no appearances, no headlines. People thought he died, but he didn't. He just disappeared from the public eye and bought himself a cliff. Now he lives in the west wing of that huge cold house. I clean the other parts, make his meals, bring him tea at 10 a.m. sharp. I leave it on a tray outside his office door. We barely speak. Sometimes he nods, sometimes he doesn't. I used to wonder what kind of man chooses to live like a ghost, but that was before the day he called me into his office and asked me a question that changed everything. That day, I stopped being just the help. That day, I started hearing his voice for real. The house itself is beautiful in a way that makes you uncomfortable. All glass and stone, perched so close to the cliff's edge it feels like one bad storm could send it crashing into the sea. The walls are smooth and white. The windows stretch from floor to ceiling. There's no art, no photos, nothing that says someone actually lives here. Everything echoes. Footsteps, doors, even your own breath. From the kitchen, you can see the ocean, endless and gray. The sky always looks a little too big out here, like it's pressing down on the house, daring it to crack. I never got used to the wind. It doesn't whistle, it howls. At night, it's even worse. The waves slam against the rocks below, and the lights in the hallway flicker like they're unsure of themselves. You walk through this house like you're trespassing in a place meant to stay untouched. There's no TV, no music, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft, rhythmic beep of the oxygen machine he keeps in the room next to his study. Every surface is spotless. Not because anyone cares, but because there's nothing else to do here. No one visits, no deliveries, no laughter, no life. Sometimes when I'm wiping down the endless glass, I catch my reflection and wonder how I ended up here. A girl from East LA, living in a castle built for a man who doesn't want to be seen. And yet, in all this silence, I swear, something is always watching. The first time I saw Mr. Hale up close, he was sitting in the sunroom, staring at nothing. He didn't look like a billionaire. Or maybe I just didn't know what one was supposed to look like. He wore a plain gray sweater, soft with wear, and dark slacks that hung too loose on his frame. His hair was silver, neatly combed, but thin at the temples. His eyes were the only thing that looked sharp, icy blue and oddly focused, like they were always watching something that wasn't there. His face wasn't scary, it was tired. There were deep lines around his mouth, not from smiling, but from pressing his lips together too long. His hands trembled, just slightly, when he reached for the glass of water next to him. He didn't speak, just nodded once, like an acknowledgement between strangers. That was it. Over time, I learned his patterns. He liked his tea without sugar, his books stacked in a certain order. He never played music, never opened the curtains all the way. When he walked, when he still could, his steps were careful, deliberate, like the floor might disappear if he moved too fast. And yet, he wasn't frightening. There was nothing about him that felt dangerous. If anything, he reminded me of those old trees you see on hiking trails, twisted from wind and time, barely standing, but somehow still rooted. He never raised his voice, never demanded anything. He just existed in the house-like furniture no one wanted to move. There was something haunting about him, but not in a horror movie way, more like grief that had taken shape and never left. I didn't know his story, didn't ask. But sometimes, in the quiet, I'd catch him watching the ocean like it owed him something, or like it took something from him and never gave it back. That was before he called me into his office, before he said the thing that shifted everything. It was a Tuesday. Late morning, sky pale and flat, like someone had drained all the color out of it. I had just set his tea on the tray outside his office like I always did, when I heard his voice. "Camilla. Come in." He'd never said my name before, not once. I froze for a second, hand still on the doorknob, then opened the door slowly. The room was darker than I expected. Curtains half closed, a single desk lamp casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. He was sitting behind a massive desk, his hands folded on top of a closed book. He didn't look up right away. I stood near the doorway, unsure if I should speak. He finally gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." I sat. For a moment there was only the sound of the waves below the cliff and the distant creak of the old window frames in the wind. Then, without lifting his gaze, he asked me something I wasn't ready for. "Do you believe in living through someone else?" I blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Not in a selfish way," he added, still calm. "I mean, when your body fails, when time runs out, do you believe a part of you can go on? Not in spirit, in flesh, in memory?" I didn't know how to answer. No one had ever asked me anything like that. I thought maybe he was talking about legacy. Or maybe he was lonely and wanted conversation. He looked at me, finally. His eyes weren't cold. They were searching, quietly desperate. "I don't have family," he said. "No one to pass anything down to. Not the company. Not the name, nothing. I have all this." He gestured around the room, to the shelves lined with untouched books, the machines humming softly in the background, the walls that didn't hold a single photo. And yet I'm going to vanish like I was never here. He paused, then leaned forward, slower than I expected. "I want to leave something alive. Not money, not a name on a building. Something real." I didn't say anything. I didn't move. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to help me do that." Silence. My breath caught, but I kept my face blank. "I'm not asking today," he added quickly. "Or tomorrow." I just needed to say it aloud, to someone. I stood up slowly. "I should finish the kitchen." He nodded once, like he expected that. As I reached the door, I heard him say, not loudly, "If you walk away and never speak of this again, I'll understand." I didn't look back. I closed the door behind me, heart pounding, hands shaking. And for the first time since I got here, I wasn't sure who I was anymore in this house. I didn't go back the next day, or the one after. I kept to my usual duties, sweeping, dusting, prepping his meals. But I avoided the West Wing like it might burn me. Every time I walked past that hallway, my chest tightened. Not because I was afraid of him. I wasn't. But because something in me had shifted, and I wasn't ready to name what it was. On the third day, I found a note tucked under my tea tray. If you're still curious, come back after sunset. The study, only if you want to. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I stood in front of the study door for a full minute that evening, listening to the wind push against the windows. I wasn't dressed any different. Still in my housework clothes. No makeup, no perfume. I wasn't here to impress anyone, just to listen. I knocked once, then opened the door. Griffin was at the same desk, but this time the curtains were drawn open. The sky behind him was streaked orange and lavender, and the sea looked softer than usual. He looked smaller somehow, thinner, or maybe just quieter. You came, he said. I did. He nodded, then motioned to the same chair as before. I sat. I won't ask again, he said, but I need you to understand what I meant. He paused, then added, I'm dying, Camilla. That's not a metaphor. I have ALS. It's eating me alive, piece by piece. The doctors say I won't see the end of the year. I didn't know what to say. I stared at the floor. I've spent most of my life building things, he continued. Code, machines, empires. But none of it breathes. None of it has a heartbeat. He looked up then, his eyes clear, unwavering. I want a child. The words dropped into the space between us like a stone into water. Not to raise. Not to control. Just to know that something of me lived on. Not the company, not the headlines. Me. He exhaled slowly. And I want you to carry it. I sat still, stunned. My mouth went dry. But he didn't look at me like a man making demands. He looked like someone confessing something shameful. I know it's a lot to ask. I know how it sounds. But I'm not offering money. I'm not asking for love. I trust you. And I need you to at least consider it. I stood up before I could think. I don't even know what to say, I whispered. You don't have to say anything. Now, he said softly. Just don't lie to yourself about how this made you feel. I opened the door. I didn't run. I didn't slam it. But I walked fast, down the hall, past the kitchen, up the stairs. And when I closed the door to my room, I didn't cry. I just stood there staring at the wall, trying to remember what kind of life I thought I'd have. And when exactly it had slipped out of my hands, I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I lay in bed with the blanket pulled to my chin, eyes wide open, the ceiling fan spinning above me like it had all the answers, and wasn't willing to share a single one. My thoughts didn't stay still. They bounced, collided, ricocheted. I kept replaying his voice, not the words themselves, but the way he said them. Calm, honest, like someone laying down cards after years of holding them too close. I should have been angry, should have felt insulted, but I wasn't. That's what scared me the most, because underneath the shock, underneath the disbelief, was something quieter. Something I didn't want to admit even to myself. Curiosity. No one had ever looked at me like that before. Not with desire, not with pity, with trust. Like I was the only person left who could carry something important, something sacred. I kept asking myself what kind of woman agrees to something like that. What kind of girl lets herself be pulled into a dying man's last wish? But the more I tried to define it, the more I realized I didn't know what kind of girl I was anymore. I thought I was someone who followed rules, who kept her head down, her voice soft, her past private. I cleaned up other people's messes. I folded laundry that wasn't mine. I lived in the quiet corners of other people's lives. But now someone was asking me to step into the center of something, to be remembered, to matter, and I didn't know if I wanted to run from that or toward it. The house was silent, but my mind wasn't. I lay there in the narrow bed tucked into the east wing, the same bed I'd made every morning with military corners and hospital folds. Tonight it felt too neat, too sharp, like it didn't belong to a person anymore, just a body trying to survive another night. I turned to my side, then my back, then my side again. My thoughts kept circling the same impossible question. Why? Me? He could have hired a surrogate, paid someone discreetly. God knows he had the money. He could have chosen someone younger, prettier, more educated, someone who wanted a baby. But he chose me, a girl with no degree, no name, no family legacy. Someone who slipped through the cracks and stayed there. Someone who, up until a few days ago, wasn't even sure she mattered outside of the things she cleaned. I didn't understand it. I didn't know if I was supposed to. Was it kindness? Desperation? Some twisted sense of penance? Or did he really just see me, as the person to carry the only part of him that would outlive the rest? I remembered the way he looked when he said it. Not demanding, not entitled, just hopeful and scared. Like he was asking the universe for permission, and I happened to be in the room when it answered. And I hated myself for not rejecting it right away. Because the truth is, I didn't feel violated. I didn't feel pressured. I felt seen. And when you've spent your life being invisible, being seen can feel like a kind of drug. But being seen doesn't mean being safe. It doesn't mean being wanted for the right reasons. It doesn't mean love. I sat up in bed, breathing hard. The wind outside rattled the windows like it was trying to come in. My mother used to tell me, silence is the sound of choices being made without you. I used to think she meant other people's choices. But now, I wasn't so sure. Because here I was, alone in the dark, letting someone else's last wish creep into my chest like it belonged there. And I didn't know if I was strong, or just lonely. I pulled the blanket tighter, heart pounding, but sleep never came. Only more silence. Only more choices, waiting. The next few days, I kept my distance. I cleaned faster, left the tea a little earlier, took longer to wash dishes I'd already rinsed twice. I avoided the West Wing entirely unless I had to cross through it. And even then, I moved like a ghost. No sound, no eye contact, no reason to linger. He didn't call me again, and that should have been a relief. Should have let things go back to normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. The house didn't change, but I did. The same wind still clawed at the windows. The same walls still echoed every footstep. But now it was like the air itself had shifted, grown heavier with the words he'd left hanging between us. I kept seeing him in my mind, sitting at that desk, hands folded, eyes steady but tired. He didn't look like a man trying to manipulate. He looked like someone preparing to disappear. That image stayed with me, haunted me. I'd scrub the kitchen counter and wonder if he was sleeping or awake, if he regretted asking, if he thought I hated him, if he cared. And then I'd get mad at myself for wondering. He wasn't family. He wasn't my friend. He was my employer, a dying man with too much money and too many ghosts. And I was just the girl who swept his floors. But somehow that didn't feel true anymore. I caught myself glancing toward the study door every time I passed the hallway, half expecting it to open, half hoping it wouldn't. Every time I didn't see him, something tightened in my chest. I wasn't avoiding him to punish him. I was avoiding him because I didn't trust myself not to stay if he asked again. One afternoon, I found myself folding towels in the laundry room, but my hands stopped moving. The scent of warm cotton and bleach hit me harder than usual, and suddenly, I was 10 years old again, sitting on the floor of our apartment in East LA, watching my mom hang clothes on a line stretched between two chairs. We didn't have a dryer, didn't have space, but she made do, humming softly to some old Spanish song playing on the radio. I remember asking her once, "Do you ever get scared?" She paused, clothespin in her mouth, then took it out slowly. "Scared of what, mija?" "I don't know. That people won't remember you. That they'll forget you were here." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Every day," she said. I was too young to understand what that meant back then. But I remember how she sat down next to me afterward, pulled me close and said, "If one person remembers your laugh, your smell, or how you held their hand when they were scared, then you don't disappear." I think about that now more than ever. She passed away when I was 17. No obituary, no funeral crowd. Just me, 2 neighbors, and a priest who mispronounced her name. Some days, I can't remember the sound of her voice, and that terrifies me. Because if I can forget her, what's stopping the world from forgetting me? I look down at the towel, in my hands, still half folded. Maybe that's why Griffin's question rattled me so deeply. Maybe the thought of carrying something forward, something no one could erase, wasn't just his wish. Maybe it was mine too. The change came slow, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. At first, it was little things. The tea I left outside his door stayed untouched longer. The stack of books by the window stopped shifting. The wheelchair he only used when absolutely necessary started appearing in the hallway more often. Then one afternoon, I walked past the sunroom and saw him asleep in the chair, head tilted awkwardly to one side. His hand was resting on the armrest, fingers curled in, twitching slightly. The oxygen machine next to him let out a soft rhythm, like a lullaby for someone on borrowed time. I should have kept walking. That's what I told myself. But instead, I stood there, just out of his line of sight, and watched. Not because I was curious, not because I felt sorry for him, but because something in me hurt just looking at him. There was a fragility to him now that hadn't been there before. Not physical, existential, like his presence in this world had become optional, and he knew it. The man who once terrified tech investors, who sat on panels next to senators and scientists, now needed help turning a doorknob. He never asked for it, though. Not once. He moved slower, ate less, spoke softer, but never called for me, never pressed the button next to his bed. I knew he didn't want to be seen like that. I knew pride when I saw it. My mother had the same kind when she couldn't lift a laundry basket anymore, but still told me she was just tired, and somehow that made it worse. I started leaving the tea with a note. Hot, strong, just like you like it. He never responded. But the cup was always empty by noon. Sometimes I'd leave flowers from the backyard. Not in a vase, just tucked into the napkin like a secret. One day, I found the same flower pressed flat between the pages of a book I'd shelved. He didn't need to say thank you, because I had already stopped being just the help. I didn't know what I was to him yet. But I knew I was watching a man disappear, and for some reason, it was starting to feel personal. It was almost midnight when I found myself outside his door. I hadn't planned to go there. I was just walking. That's what I told myself. Walking, to clear my head. Walking to think. Walking to forget I hadn't spoken to another human being in days. But my feet had their own idea. And they stopped here. The hallway was dim, lit only by a wall sconce that flickered every few seconds. The wood beneath me creaked with every shift of weight. Behind the door, silence. No voice, no movement. No sign he even knew I was there. Still, I didn't knock. I just stood, arms folded, staring at the dark grain of the door like it might blink back at me. My heart was loud, louder than the wind, louder than the soft hum of machines in the distance. Loud enough I was sure he'd hear it if he was awake. I wanted to ask him if he was okay. I wanted to ask if he meant what he said. I wanted to ask if he regretted it. But mostly, I wanted to ask why me. Not in anger, not in shame. Just genuinely. Was I really the only person left who hadn't asked him for something? Was I the last quiet place in a life full of noise? I pressed, my fingers against the smooth handle, cold under my skin. A part of me wanted to turn it, not to accept anything, not to decide anything, just to be there. But I didn't. Instead, I let my hand fall to my side. Maybe he was sleeping. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was waiting. Or maybe he'd already let go of the idea. Either way, I couldn't open that door unless I was sure I wouldn't break once I crossed it. And I wasn't sure. Not yet. So I stayed there for another moment, feeling everything. Anger, pity, longing, fear, press up against me like waves on the glass. Then I turned, walked away. I didn't look back. But I swear, in the silence behind me, something shifted. And even with my back to the door, I felt the weight of his gaze through the wood. Like he'd been waiting the whole time. I didn't knock, this time. I just opened the door. It was late, past midnight again, and the house was so quiet it felt like even the ocean had paused to listen. I hadn't planned it. I didn't rehearse anything. I didn't wear anything special. Just a loose sweatshirt and soft cotton pants. No makeup, no perfume. I didn't even brush my hair. If I was going to do this, if I was going to walk into that room and sit across from a man who asked me for something that didn't belong in words, I was going to do it as I was. Plain, present, honest. Griffin was already awake. Sitting in his armchair near the fire, a blanket over his legs, a glass of water in one hand he didn't drink from. He looked at me like I was both expected and impossible. Like he hadn't moved all night, just waited. "You came," he said. Nodded. Closed the door behind me. "I don't know why," I said quietly, "but I'm here." He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't move to rise. He just nodded once, like he understood more than I could say. I sat on the edge of the couch across from him, hands folded in my lap. The fire crackled between us, soft and low. Its glow made the room feel smaller, warmer, more human. We didn't speak for a long time. There was no script. No ceremony. Just a strange kind of peace that settled over us. Like two people stranded in the same silence, finally deciding not to fill it with lies. For the first time since I arrived in that house, I didn't feel like I was working. I didn't feel like I was trespassing. I just felt there, with him, exactly where I was meant to be. "I used to be afraid of swimming," he said, voice low, eyes on the fire. I looked up, surprised. "You? You live on a cliff." He smiled faintly. "Exactly. My father bought a summer house in Big Sur. He thought throwing me in the ocean would turn me into a man." He paused. "I almost drowned. Twice." I didn't laugh. I didn't have to. His tone said it wasn't a joke. He sipped from the glass and set it down carefully. His hands shook more than before, but he didn't mention it. "After that," he said, "I stayed out of the water, but I never stopped looking at it. Something about it terrified me. Still does. The idea of going under and no one noticing. I sat with that a moment. My mom used to say she hated birthdays. He glanced at me. Why? Because no one remembered hers. I looked at the fire. She said it was worse than being alone, being forgotten. He didn't interrupt, just listened, which somehow made the words come easier. She worked as a house cleaner her whole life. Same clients for 10, 15 years. Not one of them knew her middle name, or that she used to dance before her back gave out, or that she could sing. I swallowed. Sometimes I wonder if I'll end up like her, disappearing a little more each year. First from other people's memories, then my own. Griffin nodded, slowly. That's the fear, isn't it? Not death, erasure. We sat in silence again. But it wasn't empty. It was full of things that didn't need to be spoken, like how we both knew what it meant to feel small in a world that moved on without you, like how neither of us expected to be seen anymore. And yet, here we were. I think that's why I asked you, he said finally. Why me? Because when I look at you, I don't see noise. I see space, stillness, the kind you can trust. I didn't know how to respond. No one had ever described me like that before, like stillness could be beautiful. I looked at him then, not as my employer, not as a man dying, but as someone who, for once, didn't want to take something from me. He just wanted to leave something behind, with someone who might care enough to carry it. I'm tired, he whispered, after the fire had burned low. I nodded. Do you want me to go? He looked at me for a long moment, like he was deciding whether to lie. No, he said softly. Not yet. He shifted slowly, painfully, and gestured toward the other side of the bed. Large, cold, untouched. My breath caught, not from fear, from the strange weight of the moment. There was no expectation in his eyes, no hunger, no pressure, just longing for presence, for not being alone. I walked over quietly, slipped off my shoes, lay down fully clothed on top of the covers. There was at least a foot of space between us, more than enough room for doubt. But somehow, it didn't feel like a divide. We didn't speak. His breathing was uneven, mine too. Outside, the ocean kept breaking against the rocks. Inside, the silence settled around us like a blanket. I turned my head, just slightly, and looked at him. His face in the dark looked softer. Less like a billionaire, more like a boy who once feared drowning and never fully surfaced. He didn't turn toward me, but I felt his hand twitch. Just once, near the edge of the sheet. Not reaching, just existing. Something in my chest tightened, then loosened. I didn't want to hold him. I didn't want to be held. I just wanted to stay. To let him know he wasn't invisible. That someone saw him, even now. Especially now. I closed my eyes. And for a moment I forgot where I was. Forgot the weight of his request, the boundaries of our roles, the lines we weren't supposed to cross. There was no future in that room. No past. Just the quiet hum of a failing body, and the pulse of a girl who didn't know why she'd come, but wasn't ready to leave. And somehow, in that space between breath and silence, we understood each other. Completely. I don't know when the tears started. They didn't come in a rush. There was no sob, no gasp, no drama. Just a single drop sliding down the side of my face, soaking quietly into the pillow. Then another. And another. I kept my eyes closed, my body still. But inside something cracked, softly, like glass under warm water. No one had ever looked at me the way he did. Not with desire, not with pity, just with attention, like I wasn't a background character in someone else's story, like I was real, whole, worth staying awake for. I thought of every room I'd ever cleaned without being thanked, every meal I made that no one tasted, every version of myself I'd buried just to get by. And then I thought of now, of this man beside me, fading, fragile, and still willing to hand me a piece of his life without asking anything in return, but a place to rest his hope. It wasn't love. It wasn't sacrifice. It was something quieter. Recognition. My throat tightened. I let the tears come, not to mourn, but to make space. Because for the first time, I wasn't hiding. For the first time, someone saw me, and I didn't want to disappear anymore. The next morning, everything looked the same. Same gray light filtering through the curtains. Same cool floor against my bare feet. Same silence, thick and still as fog. But I wasn't the same, and neither was the house. Griffin didn't say a word when I brought him his tea. He nodded like always. No more. No less. There was no mention of the night before. No, thank you. No, what now? No attempt to define anything that had passed between us. And somehow that felt right, because whatever happened in that room didn't belong to language. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something to be filed away under memory or mistake. It just was. Still, I noticed things. The way his eyes lingered a second longer when I walked in. The way he breathed a little easier when I sat nearby. The way he didn't flinch when our hands accidentally brushed as I adjusted a pillow behind him. I didn't need to ask if he remembered. The quiet between us had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It carried weight, warmth, like two people had made an unspoken decision and didn't need to repeat it out loud to believe it was real. I still cleaned the rooms, still folded sheets, still brewed the tea, but every movement felt slower, more careful, like I was no longer maintaining someone else's life. I was tending to the final days of a man who'd stopped being a mystery. And somehow, without meaning. 2, I'd stopped being invisible. It started with the nausea, not dramatic, just odd. A queasiness that lingered in the mornings and crept in again at night. At first I blamed the food, then the stress, then the wind that never seemed to stop howling through the cracks of this old house. But after a week, I knew better. I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. My skin felt different. The way I moved, more cautious, like my body was guarding. Something it hadn't told me about yet. I didn't say anything to Griffin, not because I was hiding it, but because I wasn't ready to know it myself. One afternoon, I walked to the nearest drugstore, 3 miles down the coastal road. I told him I needed to get groceries. He didn't ask what kind. The test was cheap. The kind that comes in a box too big for what it holds, with directions I didn't bother reading. Back in the bathroom, I locked the door even though no one ever came in. I stared at the little stick while the timer on my phone ticked down. 3 minutes. 3 minutes of standing barefoot on cold tile, holding my breath without realizing it. When the result appeared, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stared. 2 lines. Clear. Unmistakable. It was happening. Not someday. Not maybe. Now. I sat on the edge of the tub, hands trembling, and whispered the only word I could manage. Okay. Not because I understood what this meant, but because part of me had already said yes a long time ago. In silence. In stillness. In the space where things begin before we name them. The decline came fast. One morning, I found him struggling to lift his spoon. By the end of the week, he couldn't hold a pen steady. His voice, once low and deliberate, thinned to a whisper. Then barely a breath. He stopped asking for tea. Stopped trying to sit upright without help. He'd look at me and blink once if he needed something. Twice if he didn't. But even then, his eyes stayed sharp. Alive. I started sleeping in the armchair, beside his bed. I didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to give it. The house didn't matter anymore. Only this room. Only these moments. Some nights I read aloud to him. Old sci-fi novels he used to love. He couldn't smile, but I saw the flicker in his gaze whenever I stumbled over a ridiculous alien name. He was still there, somewhere inside the failing body. Then, one morning, as sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor, he motioned weakly toward the drawer in his nightstand. I opened it. Inside was a single envelope, sealed. My name written in block letters, shaky but legible. Give it. To me? I asked. He blinked once. I took the envelope and sat down beside him. It was thick, heavy for its size. I didn't open it. I'll read it later, I whispered. When you're asleep. He blinked again. Slower this time. There was no ceremony, no farewell speech. No final words spoken aloud. But I knew what the envelope meant. It was his way of handing over the last piece of himself. Not just to me, but to whatever came next. And as I sat there, holding it gently in my hands, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit until now. He trusted me more than anyone had ever trusted me in my life. Not because I was perfect, but because I stayed. It happened fast. 1 minute, I was changing the blanket. The next, his eyes rolled back and his body went still, too still. Griffin? Nothing. I dropped the blanket. My hands were on his shoulders before I realized it, shaking him gently, then harder. His skin was cold, his mouth slightly open, but no breath came. Griffin? My voice cracked. Hey, stay with me. Griffin? Still nothing. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand, fingers trembling as I dialed 911. It rang once, twice, and then I was shouting into the receiver, stumbling through the address, through the words, "He's not breathing," through the tears that came so fast I couldn't see. "Please," I kept saying. "Please hurry. Please. Please." I dropped the phone and crouched beside him again, pressing my ear to his chest. There was something, faint, fluttering, like a bird slamming against glass. It wasn't enough. I pressed my forehead to his and whispered without thinking, without deciding. Just knowing. "I'm pregnant," I said. The words slipped out as if they'd been waiting their whole life for air. "Do you hear me?" I whispered. "You're not gone. Not yet. You left something. I'm carrying it. You're still here." A sob broke in my throat. I didn't say yes the way you asked, but I said yes the night I stayed. I said yes every morning I didn't leave. I said yes when I cried next to you. My hand found his. I held it against my belly, even though it didn't move. "You have a heartbeat in this house," I whispered, "so don't you dare disappear now." In the distance, I heard the ambulance siren begin to rise. It sounded so far away, like a promise trying to catch up, and all I could do was hold on, shaking, breathless, and whispering his name like it was the only word left I still believed. They said he passed at 3:42 a.m. No pain, no struggle, just gone. I wasn't in the room. They made me wait in a plastic chair down the hall, under fluorescent lights that hummed like they were bored of grief. A nurse came out, young, kind, tired. and said the words I knew were coming. "I'm sorry. He didn't make it." I didn't cry. I just nodded. Like I'd heard someone call my name from far away. An hour later, I sat alone in the hospital's family lounge, staring blankly at the muted TV bolted to the wall. The morning news was on. Breaking. Tech pioneer Griffin Hale confirmed dead, at 64. His face appeared in the corner of the screen. An old press photo, years before I ever met him. Stronger, sharper. Still standing tall in front of machines that looked like the future. Known for revolutionizing artificial intelligence and disappearing from public life nearly a decade ago, Hale leaves behind no known family or heirs. Sources say he died of complications related to ALS. More at 11. That was it. 64 years, reduced to 30 seconds of filler between the weather and a traffic report. They didn't know about the envelope. They didn't know about the tea. They didn't know he used to be afraid of drowning. I sat there, hands resting over my belly, and whispered, "You were more than they ever knew." But he wasn't here to hear it. Only I was. And now, I was the only one left who truly understood the shape of what the world just lost. The house felt different. When I returned, not quieter, just empty in a way that didn't feel physical. Like something essential had been lifted out of the walls and taken with him. No more beeping machines, no more soft shuffle from the study. Just me. And memory. I waited until dusk to open the envelope. I sat on the couch where we had talked. Where he had once reached for a glass he couldn't quite hold. Where silence had first become something that connected us, not divided us. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter, thick parchment, creased like it had, been rewritten more than once, and a small box. I opened the box first. A ring, simple silver, worn smooth at the edges, the kind of thing no billionaire would wear in public, the kind of thing a person keeps not for its value, but for its story. The letter was written in his Inoa hand, uneven, but unmistakably his. "Camila, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I won't waste space on what you already know, how grateful I am, how deeply I trusted you. You gave my final days meaning. But this letter isn't about me. It's about what comes after. Inside this envelope is the only thing I've worn every day since I was 16. My mother gave it to me. She said, 'Wear it until you know who to give it to.' I never did. Not until now. I want you to give it to the child. Not because of wealth or legacy, but because they were wanted. They were chosen. If it's a girl, I hope she has your stillness. If it's a boy, I hope he has your eyes. And if one day they ask who I was, you can tell them simply, 'He was real, and he tried.' Call them Jonah or Leah, whatever feels right when the time comes. But let them know. They were named before they were born. With all that I have left, I didn't cry when I finished reading. I just closed the letter, held the ring in my palm, and whispered, 'Leah.' If it's a girl, her name will be Leah. For the first time, the future didn't scare me. It had a name. He showed up 2 days after the obituary ran. Suit too sharp, cologne too loud, smile too quick. Said his name was Dorian Beck, legal liaison for Hale Technologies. He didn't ask to come in, just stepped inside like the house still belonged to someone who'd answer if he called out. "I'm terribly sorry for your loss," he said. "The kind of sorry people rehearse in mirrors. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't need to." He got to the point quickly. There's interest in managing Mr. Hale's intellectual estate. Patents, archives, the lab in New Mexico. But we've also been informed of a pending development, a personal matter. He didn't say the word pregnancy. He didn't have to. He opened his briefcase, laid out a manila folder like it was a menu. In accordance with contingency clauses outlined prior to his health decline, The company is prepared to offer you a trust. 7 figures. In exchange for private handling of the situation, a legal team will manage everything. Discretion is paramount, of course. He smiled again. Polite. Certain. I looked down at the folder. Neat columns, notarized stamps, the future in black ink and bullet points. Then I looked up and said nothing for a long time. Finally, I folded my hands in my lap. I'm not for sale, I said. His expression didn't change, but I saw it. Just beneath the surface, that flicker of confusion, of recalculation. Miss Reyes, he began carefully, this is a generous offer. It's not about control. It's about stewardship. Ensuring that what Mr. Hale created is preserved. Properly. I stood up. Then preserve it. But not through me. He blinked. You're rejecting the trust? I'm not rejecting anything, I said quietly. I'm choosing something else. My body, my child, my story. None of that belongs in your documents. I held the ring up between us. This is the only legacy he wanted to pass on through me. Not shares, not headlines. A name, a heartbeat. He nodded slowly, packed the folder back into his case. You understand there will be no further offers. I smiled, just a little. Good. As he walked out, he paused near the door. Never mentioned you, you know, he said. Not once, not in any paperwork. I know, I said, and closed the door behind him. I packed in silence. There wasn't much. A few books I hadn't finished, clothes folded neatly, though most of them never left the house. The letter, the ring, and a single photograph I found. Tucked in the back of Griffin's drawer, black and white, water-stained, a boy on a rocky beach, holding a kite in one hand and a grin too wide for his face. He never told me who took it. He didn't have to. I boxed it carefully. The house creaked as I moved, like it knew I was leaving. Like it didn't want to be left alone again. But there was nothing left here for me now. No one to feed, no one to wait for. Griffin was gone. And in a few weeks, I wouldn't be just Camilla anymore. I'd be someone's mother. The last thing I packed was the blanket from his room. The one he always asked for, even when the weather didn't call for it. Faded, soft at the edges. It smelled faintly of cedar, old paper, and the quiet kind of dying. I folded it gently, placed it on top. Then I walked to the back of the house and opened the glass doors that led to the balcony. The wind caught my hair immediately, tugging it across my face like a soft warning. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and endless. The same view he'd watched every morning. The same view he feared, because it never looked back. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I stepped barefoot onto the wooden deck, the boards warm under my feet, rested my hands on the railing, and let the salt air fill my lungs. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I thought about all the rooms I'd cleaned in this house, all the silences I'd kept, all the words I hadn't said because no one ever asked. And yet somehow I'd left a mark, not in marble, not in code or money, but in someone's memory, in a letter, in a name that hadn't even been spoken aloud yet. I placed one hand over my stomach. Still flat. Still waiting. Leah, I whispered. Or Jonah. Whoever you are. He saw you. Before you were real. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the waves carry the words. Then I turned back toward the house. Took one last look at the door I'd never walk through again. And I left. Quietly, like I had arrived. But this time, I was not invisible. This time, I carried more than just myself into the world. The new place was small, but it was mine. 3rd, floor, no elevator. Cracked tile in the kitchen, one stubborn window that never quite closed all the way. But sunlight poured in every morning, and the neighbors played old jazz records through the walls on Sundays. It was enough. I got a job at a bookstore downtown. Mornings behind the counter, afternoons restocking shelves. The pay wasn't great, but the work was quiet, predictable. Nobody asked where I'd been or what I used to do. And that suited me, just fine. By the time spring came, the bump was visible. People on the bus started giving up their seats. Strangers smiled at me without asking questions. I'd catch my reflection in the shop window sometimes, hand resting on my belly without realizing it, and wonder who that woman was. Not the girl who used to clean rooms for people who never learned her name. Not just the keeper of someone else's legacy. Someone new. Still forming. Like the child inside her. The mornings were hardest. I'd wake up too early, the apartment still dark, and for a few seconds forget where I was. I'd reach out, half expecting, to hear the ocean, or the faint rustle of Griffin's blanket when he shifted in his chair. But there was only silence. And then, movement, a tiny flutter beneath my ribs, like a reminder, you're not alone. I'd whisper to the dark, I know. Then I'd sit up, boil water for tea, and start another day. There was no estate, no spotlight, just me, a growing life, and a quiet promise. I hadn't broken, and that somehow was everything. He was born just after midnight, no storm, no drama, just a long, quiet labor in a dimly lit hospital room with soft jazz playing through a speaker above the sink. A nurse held my hand. I don't even remember her name, but I remember how warm her palm was. When they placed him on my chest, I didn't cry, I just stared. He didn't wail like most babies. He blinked. Once, twice. Then locked eyes with me as if he'd been waiting to meet me longer than either of us could explain. His eyes were pale blue. Too pale. And I knew, without needing science or proof, that he had them. Griffin's eyes. The Sao, same shade that once studied oceans, that once looked at me not with desire or desperation, but with stillness. Recognition. The nurse asked if I had a name. I nodded. Lucian, I whispered. Lucian Reyes. No middle name, no hyphen, no need for a father's surname, just his own. He grew fast, strong, quiet, mostly. But he had this way of staring at things, bookshelves, passing clouds, streetlights in the rain, like he was already working something out. Like the world whispered things to him the rest of us couldn't hear. People would sometimes say, he's got old soul eyes, and I'd just smile. Because I knew. No one else had to. There were no reporters knocking at my door, no company lawyers, no press releases, just grocery lists, late-night feedings, diapers, rent, laughter, tears. A normal life, exactly what I wanted. I never told him about Griffin, not yet. When he asks one day, I'll tell him the truth. But not the headlines, not the legend. I'll tell him about a man who used to be afraid of the ocean. A man who gave me tea without asking anything in return. A man who handed me a ring instead of a contract. And I'll tell him, you were wanted, long before you were born. Until then, I let Lucian be a child, unburdened, free. He doesn't need the world to know whose eyes he carries, because I know. And that's more than enough. I started writing it all down the night Lucian turned 4. He was asleep in the next room, one arm flung over his stuffed dinosaur, like he'd been defending it in a dream. The apartment was quiet, lit only by the lamp above the kitchen table. I opened a notebook, linen cover, no lines, and wrote the first sentence without thinking. You were never an accident. The pen didn't stop for hours. I wrote about Griffin, but not as the world knew him. I didn't use words like founder or visionary. I didn't mention market caps or magazine covers. I wrote about a man who loved silence, who feared being forgotten. A man who asked not for forgiveness, but for memory. I wrote about the day I met him, the first cup of tea, the awkward, quiet questions, the fear in his eyes when he realized time was running out. I wrote about the night I stayed, not as something holy, not as something broken, but as a choice. My choice. I wrote about the stillness that passed between us, how it made something inside me settle for the first time in my life. And I wrote about you, how you came like a whisper through the dark. How I knew your name before I knew your face, how you saved me from becoming invisible. I don't know when you'll be ready to read it, maybe at 10, maybe 20, maybe never. But when the day comes, and it will, when you look in the mirror and ask, where did I come from? I want you to have more than just a name. I want you to have a story. Your story. Written not in bloodlines or last names, but in choice, and quiet, and love, the kind that doesn't need witnesses to be real. It was past 10. I had just finished writing for the night, fingers ink-smudged and eyes aching. I was about to turn off the lamp when I heard it. A soft tapping, steady, gentle, rhythmic. I paused, listened. Not the radiator, not the wind. Again, tap, 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 pause, then repeat. I stood and followed the sound down the short hallway, barefoot, quiet. Lucian's door was ajar. The glow of his nightlight spilled across the carpet. He was sitting up in bed, legs crossed under the blanket, hands tapping softly against his knees. His eyes were half closed. He didn't see me watching. But the rhythm, I knew that rhythm, it was the same pattern Griffin used to play, lightly, on the armrest of his chair, late at night when he couldn't sleep. A syncopated 3 count, broken by silence, then restarted. Over and over, like a code only he understood. He said it calmed him. Said he heard it once in a piano piece when he was young and could never forget it. A piece I'd never been able to find again, no matter how many playlists I searched. Lucian tapped it like it had lived in his bones since birth. I stepped into the room gently. Hey, baby. Can't sleep? He looked up, blinking as if surfacing from deep water. I was just playing, he said, rubbing his eyes. Playing what? He shrugged. I don't know. It just feels nice. Like something I heard before, but not really. I sat on the edge of his bed, heart tight in my chest. Do you want me to sing to you? I offered. He shook his head. Just stay a minute? Of course. I pulled the blanket over his legs, smoothed back his curls. He rested his head against my arm and closed his eyes. And just before he drifted off, his fingers started tapping again, softly, unconsciously. The same rhythm, the same music. Passed down not through teaching, but through something older, something silent, something remembered. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Good night, Lucian." But in my heart, I said something else. He hears you. Somehow. He hears you. If you're still here, listening, I guess that means you wanted to know how the story ends. Or maybe, like me, you've stayed for the quiet parts, the ones people skip over when they only want the facts. Who he was, who I was, what happened. But none of that was ever the point. Not really. You see, this isn't a story about a billionaire and a maid. It's not about inheritance, or tragedy, or some dramatic forbidden night. It's about what happens when two invisible people see each other. Truly see. I didn't set out to fall into someone else's life. I wasn't looking for meaning. I wasn't chasing love or legacy or anything bigger than a paycheck and a little peace. But sometimes, life hands you a quiet room and a dying man, and you don't run. You listen. And somehow, in the stillness, between his breathing and mine, something grew. Something real. I know some of you might be wondering why I never told the world. Why I never took the money. Why I didn't fight for the headline, or the legacy, or the estate. Simple. Because the most valuable thing he gave me didn't need to be proven. It kicks inside me when my son laughs. It hums when he taps that strange little rhythm on the table. It breathes through the letters I wrote in a notebook I never showed anyone, until now. And I'm not sharing this because I want attention. I'm sharing it because maybe someone out there feels invisible right now. Like your story doesn't matter unless someone rich, or loud, or powerful decides it does. But I'm here to tell you, it does. Even if no one remembers your birthday, even if no one says your name right, even if the world keeps moving and forgets to look back, you still matter, because the smallest act, staying when you could leave, seeing someone when they've stopped believing they're worth it, that changes everything. So yeah, this is my story, his story, ours, and maybe now it's yours too. It was a Sunday, the kind of day that felt like a second chance. Soft breeze, warm sun, leaves falling in slow spirals. Lucian was running ahead, arms out like wings, chasing shadows only he could see. I sat on a bench with my hands wrapped around a paper cup of cocoa, barely warm. He stopped under a tree, his favorite one, and started tapping his fingers against the bark. That rhythm again. Steady, familiar, like a language he hadn't yet learned to speak, but somehow still understood. I smiled. "Mom?" he called out. "Do trees remember things?" I tilted my head. Maybe. Why? Because this one feels like it knows me. I didn't answer right away. Just watched him, hair wild, cheeks flushed, completely unaware of how much of someone else lived in the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the sky, always searching for something no one else could see. "Lucian," I said gently. There was someone who loved trees. And rhythm. And stillness. Just like you. He turned, curious. Was he my dad? A beat passed. My heart didn't race this time. "Yes," I said softly. "In a way that matters." He looked at me with that gaze, steady, open, waiting. "Where is he now?" I looked around. The rustling leaves, the tapping wind, the faint echo of something old, still breathing beneath it all. "He's not gone," I said. "He didn't vanish. He shifted." Lucian frowned, playful. "Shifted like a transformer?" I laughed quietly. "No, baby, not like that." I placed my hand over my heart. "He didn't disappear. He just moved into different things." "Like me?" I nodded. "Exactly like you." And I said it, not just for him, but for me. Last time. He didn't end. He continued. The last page of the notebook was thinner than the rest. Maybe from time. Maybe from my fingers brushing it over and over, unsure of what the final sentence should be. I sat by the window, Lucian asleep, in the other room, the sky outside pulling its last light over the rooftops. The world was winding down, the way it always does, quietly, without asking for permission. I ran my hand over the cover, worn, softened at the corners. I had started this story to give something to my son, something true, something gentle. But somewhere along the way, I realized it wasn't just for him. It was for me too. For the girl I used to be, scrubbing kitchen tiles and pretending not to notice when people looked through her. For the woman who walked into a dying man's room expecting silence, and instead found a heartbeat that matched her own. I thought of Griffin, not the inventor, not the patient, but the man who asked me to sit beside him and said nothing. And in that silence, gave me everything. I looked out the window. The streetlights flickered on one by one. A car passed, slow and steady. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then stopped. And just like that, it was time. I picked up the pen, wrote the last line. One night can rewrite an entire life. Then I closed the book. No flourish, no final thought, just stillness. And in that stillness, peace. If you're still here, if you're still listening, I guess this part is for you. I've told you the story, the nights, the name, the silence that turned into something louder than words. But if you're wondering why it matters, if you're asking yourself why this story, why now, why her, why him, let me tell you something I've learned. Something that has nothing to do with money, legacy, or romance. This is a story about staying. Not staying forever. Not staying perfectly. Just staying long enough to see someone through. And letting someone else see you when you've spent most of your life trying not to be seen. I used to believe that stories needed big endings to mean something. A wedding. A will. A miracle. But Griffin didn't give me a miracle. He gave me a moment. One moment where everything else, status, regret, fear, just paused. And all that was left was two people in a room, choosing to stay in the same breath. Choosing not to run. That night didn't erase who we were. It didn't fix the past. But it repositioned it. And I think that's what people forget sometimes. That not every life needs to be rewritten. Some just need to be seen from a different angle. A little closer. A little slower. The world never knew what we were. And maybe it's better that way. Because if they had, they would have tried to define it, box it in, make it easier to swallow. But this wasn't meant to be easy. It was meant to be real. And real things are messy, unspoken, fleeting. But they stay with you. In the rhythm of your child's fingers, in a name whispered at sunset, in the way you step into a room and pause, remembering a silence that once held you gently. Lucian is growing up now. He doesn't ask much about his father yet, but I know the day will come, and when it does, I won't give him the headlines. I won't give him the myth. I'll give him the truth. That his father was afraid, brilliant, quiet, and in the end, brave enough to ask for company in his final breath. Brave enough to trust me. With his story, with his name, with our child. That's all anyone really wants, I think. Not to be forgiven. To be remembered. So if you're listening to this and you feel invisible, left out, like your story doesn't have a headline or a platform or a perfect Act 3, I want you to know you're still in it. You are the story, even if no one else notices, even if the world keeps scrolling. Every quiet kindness, every time you stay when no one else does, every time you look at someone fully instead of looking away, you're writing something. You're continuing something. You are the legacy someone else might never get to name, but feel anyway. Because here's the part no one tells you. You don't need to be known by the world to be unforgettable to someone. Sometimes you only need to be there. One night. One moment. One heartbeat beside another. That's all it takes. I didn't get the fortune. I didn't get the mansion. But I got something I can carry. A son who taps out music in the dark. A letter in my drawer that I read when the world feels too loud. A silence I'm no longer afraid of. and a simple, unshakable truth. One night can rewrite an entire life. And if it happened for me, it can happen for you too.